Welcome to Total Network Operations, the project with a podcast that's dedicated to hardworking network operators like you who deliver all the packets in a highly automated and orchestrated manner, of course. Here on TNOps, we shine a bright light on great ideas in NetOps so you can make informed decisions for your network and your team. I'm your host, Scott Robon. Today, we have a special sponsored episode with Peter Spragata, Chief Architect at Itential. Itential is a leader in helping customers herding their automations and putting them into production. And we also have Ethan Banks with us today as our illustrious co-host. Welcome to you both. Over the years, both Peter and I, and many of you listening, have seen examples of how new tech can impact processes and workflow, introducing better ways of getting things done. Organizations are looking to embrace the agility of a DevOps approach. However, it's become all about development, it seems, and we still leave operations to fend for themselves. An awful lot of emphasis is put on how individual engineers need to upskill and change. And while that's true, less, and perhaps much less emphasis is put on how organizations are impacted by adopting new tools. It's important to understand how to rebalance the scale and find a delicate balance between development and operations. Automation is one area that can bring significant process change, but it's bigger than just automation. Peter and I have been having a conversation about this for a while, and we wanted to bring it to you today on Total Network Operations. So, Peter, it's great to have you on TNOps today. Before we dive in, tell us a little bit about yourself, a little bit of your history, and how you got to do what you do at Itential.
Yeah, great. Thanks, Scott, and thanks for having me. It's always fun to be able to sit down and have these conversations. But yeah, for those out there who are not familiar with me, I've been doing this a very long time, and I've got all the scars to prove it in many places. I've been an equal part software developer and network engineer for the better part of 25 years, which essentially means I've been confused all of this time. As you might expect. It's kind of like we got to this point in time where all of a sudden everything became clear, about 12, 15 years ago. And, I had the unique opportunity to leave the networking industry kind of proper, working for vendors, and went and joined a tiny little company that I really wasn't sure if they would make it or not. But that company was called Ansible. And I had the unique opportunity to bring networking to Ansible and Ansible to networking. And that was a tremendous journey and something I really enjoyed. And since then, I've left there and I've had the unique opportunity now to join Itential, where I serve as our chief architect, which really just kind of means that I spend an awful lot of time working with customers, working with the industry to figure out, how do we continue to extract more value out of both automation and orchestration and be able to deliver on a lot of those promises that automation orchestration, really kind of brought to the table as customers look to go down their digital transformation journeys.
So let me ask you to fire up the Wayback Machine, right? And I'm sorry that you were confused for so long. And I think we all can relate to that. But in your transition from, having a network focus to getting into software development and automation, what were some of the things that you went through from, understanding subnets and spanning tree to actually automating things? Like, can you remember any of the hallmarks of like changes in your thought, what that personal evolution looked like for you?
Yeah, boy, can I ever. The one that stands out and the one that immediately hits me almost right off the bat as you were asking the question was, coming to the realization that I had been doing networking for so long that I had forgotten, or I don't want to say forgotten, but maybe lost to a certain extent, the skill of taking very complex issues and breaking them down into very discernible, simple steps that I would chain together. And so as we started going down this automation path and we started to turn to software to do a lot of that was a skill I almost had to relearn all over again. And once I did, it really opened the door and it really kind of brought everything into focus. And that's what really started to accelerate the journey.
So I don't know if this example works for you or not, but like one of the ways I think of that is like if I try to automate the upgrade of a network element in the network, right? There's a series of discrete steps. Like there's a smaller set of problems, do some set of pre-checks. Maybe I write a script that does the pre-checks, then I want to make sure the target image is on the network device I'm actually upgrading. And I maybe write a script for that. Then I have a script that actually fires up the upgrade, right? And waits for it to be completed and then does any error checking if it does or doesn't go well. And then I do some series of post checks, right? So
Mm-hmm.
that's like a workflow where I've broken it up into discrete steps. Is that a good example of your transition, or do you have anything more concrete that you want to share on that?
No, it is. That's a great example. But what was interesting is even within each of those steps, there are so many things we would take for granted when we're doing it manually. For instance, let me give you an example. Copying the image to the device. It has to be done. We all understand that. But what
Yep.
we don't realize is that when you do it manually, you start the transfer in motion, and you get yourself a cup of coffee and maybe read the paper and have dinner, and eventually, right, the image just shows up.
Sure.
But when you start thinking about that in terms of software, all of a sudden you've got a series of problems that start to crop up, right? Because you have to keep the connection open, and you have to deal with all of the things that software needs to do to be able to facilitate a long running process in this particular case.
Right. And so now each individual on the ops team may do this their own way and may actually write it their own way. And Ethan has his scripts that he has on his laptop, and Scott has his scripts that keep on his laptop. And like, that's a problem. We've seen that acknowledged in the environment today. What are you hearing from your customers, the people you interact with on this front?
Yeah, this is the problem right now. If you were to pinpoint the problem right now, this is it. It's that everybody's got their own way of doing things, their own set of scripts, their own even within the scripts themselves, their own way of writing it, and they're using different tools, different technologies, different ways of going about it, different ways of instantiating it, different ways of sharing it. I mean, the list goes on and on and on and on. And I think this is one of the challenges right now that we're facing industry wide. This is not unique to any one vendor, any one tool, any one way of doing things. This seems to be a common theme across the board. So it's, how do we start to get control of that? Because, I think back to, I had a bit of a foray where I actually, left the vendor side, and I was actually a operator for a period of time. And I can think back to those days, and there was no way I was letting, no offense, Ethan, but there's no way your scripts are getting on my network. I've seen what you can write, and that's just not going to happen.
Come on, man. That's harsh. It's not wrong, but it hurts a little.
He's not good at sharing. He's not good at sharing. You're not going to get his scripts out of him. He wants to run those scripts himself.
Exactly. but therein lies the problem, right? It's that we want organizations to automate. Organizations want to automate, but they just don't know how to do it in a way that they can sleep well at night, knowing that their network isn't going to melt down.
So I've heard you talk about this at AutoCon 2 and in other forums in terms of developing a product mindset.
Yeah.
I think of it in terms of putting something into production, but why don't you unpack product's mindset? What do you mean on this front?
Yeah. So when we talk product mindset, right, we're really kind of taking a lot of this technology and we're using it instead of just trying to codify operational policy into automation. We're actually using a combination of automation and orchestration to now be able to extract value out of the network. So if you think about this journey we've all been on, and, I trace myself back, a good 13, 14 years of doing just strictly network automation. And during that time, it was all about, just start automating, just start doing things, which is still the right thing to do today, right? Just start somewhere. I don't care if it's as simple as automating interface descriptions, start somewhere. And let the snowball start rolling down the hill. The problem, or not the problem, the challenge became is that we all started doing that, but what we realized is that where was the real value, right? Sure, we were doing our jobs faster, but in reality, we weren't really fundamentally changing anything. This whole idea of a product mindset is we can actually start to move away from what I would call cost optimization, or in other words, optimizing how we do our job, and start the process of bringing value. In other words, I'm now going to bring value to the organization because I'm going to leverage that shared infrastructure in such a way that I'm building products and services that become consumed by my internal customers, which are lines of business, app dev teams, et cetera. And they can really start to leverage that infrastructure the same way that they might leverage something like public cloud infrastructure.
Which is a different way of thinking about it for the average network engineer. Most of us that have been in this business for a while doing network operations, the workflow is something like, I have a ticket that showed up to provision the thing to support this project or to bring this new user on board or whatever it is. And it's a reactionary thing. There's a ticket, I make it do the thing, off we go. Or it's merger and acquisition activity. Got to bring the new company on board. Okay, let's start with the VPN tunnel and then let's begin to do an investigation. There's no automation to it. It's all very reactionary driven. People can't do anything themselves. They can't request a common service themselves. Everything's got to go through the network operations team. So what you're describing to me, Peter, is, hey, I'm going to build a service that's a standard thing that someone can go, I don't know, pick it off of a web page, let's say, fill in a form, click submit, and maybe there's an approval process or whatever, but ultimately it's provisioned for them without me as a network engineer having to get a ticket and figure out what it is they need and then build it for them. Am I on the right track here?
You are. You're absolutely spot on right. Because, for far too long in networking, we have taken a box from a vendor. I don't care who the vendor is, name your favorite here. And we've looked at what are the capabilities of this box and use that to determine what is it I can deliver to my organization. Now what we're saying is let's focus on what is the product we need to build. So in other words, instead of building an F5 VIP, now I want to actually build my version of a VIP, my version of a load balancer with its set of properties that I'm going to deliver and make available to the organization. And then I figure out how do I map that to my underlying infrastructure? The real gain here is that for my customers, the development team or the line of business organizations, et cetera, to your exact point, right now they can go and they can just simply order that product, and that product will automatically then be provisioned on the infrastructure and made available to them.
It's funny you bring up that specific example, an F5 VIP, in that one of the companies I worked for, Peter, I built hundreds of them, I suppose, and it was the cookie cutter. It was the same thing every time. Did they need an F5 VIP? Well, that was the realization of how to deliver the service they needed. We were in part a software development organization. And so what people actually needed was, I need a QA environment stood up so that this iteration of my code can complete QA testing or then UAT testing and whatever was next, which needed, it had a very short life cycle, to stand up and a tear down of an F5 VIP. Perfect thing where they could have just picked that off a list and made it go and never talk to me. I don't need to validate their request. It was routine. It was something that we could have put checks and balances in and automated that whole process for them.
That's exactly right. That's exactly right. Because there's no value in, and this is something even I learned early in my career, right? There's, sure, typing out, building a VIP on an F5 or building an MLAG or a VERF or name your tech, that doesn't matter. The first few times you do it, this is exciting. This is cool. Yes, I made this work. By the 644th time you've done it, it's like, okay, I'm a little over this. I don't need to do this anymore. How can I just turn this over to a process and let the process do it? And that's exactly kind of the concept here. You're absolutely right.
So let's spend a little time, connecting the steps and the dots here, right? And I love how you said, how do you get started? You start by doing something, right? And that is a right place to start. I would throw a little caveat in, and maybe this is just from my focus over the last couple of years on, I'm a big fan of the 7 Habits book, right? And begin with the end in mind. Maybe I should have a little thought of, automating the things that I do that are routine, right? Routinized, right? And we just talked about 17 different examples in that snippet of conversation. But building the mindset of delivering value versus just automating what I'm doing, there's a couple things that have to happen there. Number one, setting that expectation that you put out there, like, okay, how is this going to deliver more value? And I think part of that is, if I've got new tools to do the job, it might change how I actually do the job. Like, I have a manual workflow that I go through. I could just automate my workflow. And again, maybe not a bad place to start, but in the process, you might see, oh, here's 3 steps that I can skip or do much more efficiently. It's like when you refactor code. I don't want to sound like I'm a real developer, because I'm not, right? But there's a reason you go back and refactor code, because you find a more efficient way to do something. Can you pull out any specific examples on that journey to I've got new automation and orchestration tools, and it lets me get to delivering value more quickly? I know that's kind of ambiguous, but let me let you play with that for a bit.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think it's a fair question from the aspect that it's the journey so many people are on. And I think that, what you start to realize, and actually Ethan alluded to this a little bit, is that, you realize that after you've done it, whether you've done it manually or you've done it and then you've automated. So what automation just taught you, right, is that it taught you, okay, there were steps that I was either skipping over or not doing. And automation teaches you, okay, you've got to do things consistently, right? So we learned that as we went through the automation journey. But now we take it to the next step, and that is when you've done it enough times, you start to realize, okay, 95% of what I'm doing the same every single time I do this. And I'm only changing one or two or three things. And when you start to look at that and say, wait a minute, I can now templatize that. I can now, to your point, refactor that into a common pattern. Now I can deliver that, and I can just simply ask for the one or two things that I need. Oh, wait a minute. Now I can build a form, so I don't even have to ask for that. Oh, wait, now the form can kick off the thing and input and that's where the snowball effect really starts to happen, right? And so you start to recognize those patterns and you realize, hey, I actually do have a product here I'm delivering. I just didn't realize that's what I was doing. And so now I can build that directly into my orchestration layer in such a way that can be delivered. And then organizations, that's how you start to create the value from the product mindset.
And I know we're not management consultants in this conversation, but it sounds like there's a conversation, right? Where, how do you get individual engineers and leadership to start thinking about this differently? And like, you both have conversations with lots of it. We all have conversations with individual customers. Are there any nuggets that you've seen with customers, like really going, aha, I see how this really changes things? I know I'm springing this on you both, but I'll leave the floor open to either of you to talk to that. Have you seen anybody like really get it and start to make the leap here?
Yeah, I'll share with you. I've seen this example more than once, in more than one instance. Is that, what we always have to remember is that, so we talk a lot about network automation and orchestration, and as well we should, and it's stuff that we're doing. But let's also remember that the entire tech stack has automation and orchestration built into it. Right? Whether you're talking about networking or you're talking about databases or you're talking about middleware, you're talking about web front ends, or you're talking about just application, whatever it is,
Absolutely.
Everything has automation orchestration built into it. And so where that big aha moment really comes to bear is when you're working on delivering these products and services, but your internal customers, they're also trying to automate the build out of their application through, say, a pipeline, for instance, right? And they want to use a tool like, I don't know, Terraform or Ansible or whatever tool they happen to use, because they want to start to work with you at an API layer. I'm going to go out on a limb. I usually don't use absolutes. I'm going to use a bit of an absolute right now. And he's always biting me in the butt. But I'm going to go out and say that there is not a single software developer in the world that wants to pick up the phone and call the networking person and ask for them to be able to build infrastructure so that they can run their application.
That's okay. We don't want them calling us either. We don't want those calls anyway, right? Just let me do my job. Yeah.
True. But that's where the aha moment comes into play, as we start to realize, wait a minute, now the networking team and the app dev teams, they can come together at an API layer through automation. And now we're cooking. Now we got something going here.
So we're throwing automation and orchestration around a little flippantly. Peter, could I put you on the spot and ask you to get a little more concrete? Like, how do you differentiate between the terms?
Yeah.
Where's the line crossed from automation to orchestration?
Yeah, this is a fun I love this conversation. And I've been having this conversation for many years. But the way I've always looked at it, first, before I even get into the definitions or my definitions of the each, I think it's important that we always note that it should not be a religious discussion. It should be a fun debate. It's a real debate, but it should be a fun debate. We should never hold the line so hard that it's like you either fall into the automation bucket or you fall in the orchestration bucket. That's always kind of my own personal rule when I get into this. But that being said, when I think about automation, I really think about these are those discrete domain-specific tasks that are typically being done in order, or by teams that are really kind of focused on a very small segment of the infrastructure. Maybe it's your core routing team, maybe it's the data center networking team, maybe it's SD-WAN, maybe it's cloud, whatever it is. They really, these are the really, and the really smart folks, right? The folks who really get how to build routing infrastructure, how to build data center switching infrastructure. That to me is automation. And you want those folks automating. You don't want to extract, you don't want to, pull them so far away that they can't continue to do what it is you want them doing. And that is to get the most value they can out of the infrastructure being built.
Sure.
Orchestration, by contrast, is really more about how do I take all those separate islands of automation and combine them in such a way that I ultimately can deliver a service to my customer. And to me, that's where the orchestration part comes into play. So I'm not looking at very specific technical bits anymore. I'm now looking at more of that abstraction that, I need to do a little bit at the core. I need to do a little bit of data center. I need a little bit of SD-WAN, and a little bit of firewall, and so on and so forth. But at the end of that, I actually have a fully function service that then can be consumed by an end user. And so that's kind of how
orchestration to me is taking those individual automation steps and putting them together in a way that you as an engineer know all the steps you got to do. I got to do this. I got to do this. Oh, and I got to do this first. There's a dependency there. If I don't get that done, I can't get the next thing done. Mm-hmm. And stitching them all together in a way that is bulletproof. You are putting the tests in place. You're putting the checks and balances in place. And then you're stringing them all together in such a way that, exactly as you were describing, Peter, at the end of it, you stitch together a whole bunch of different automations and built around the kind of things that you as an engineer would have built around it by doing this particular show command at the end of this step to validate that this thing happened. And then, okay, we're good. We can proceed to the next step. Orchestration is putting all of that together in a package that is consumable as a service.
That's exactly right. I think about some of my early days in network engineering, and I'd be tasked with build out whatever, it doesn't matter. So I'd go in, I'd do my thing, and whether it's using a tool or typing it or whatever, and I'd be done with it. And hey, I'm done. Everything's good to go. And hour later, I get the phone call. Hey, the application's not working. I'm like, I just finished it. So I log. Oh shoot, I forgot to do this step. Hold on. And I do that. And this repeats itself over and over and over until I finally have gotten all those steps that I forgot about. And now the thing, that's where orchestration really brings the value.
For me, one of the classics was I forgot to add the subnet that I just created to the VPN allow list. So it's all working internally, but the remote guy couldn't get to it. Oh, sorry, man, my bad. Yep.
That's exactly right. That's exactly right.
Like, You've all had to iterate through all those steps enough times to finally, Peter knows how to glue it all together. Ethan knows how to glue it all together. And I can memorialize that in an orchestrated workflow, right? And maybe there's like turning up a new site and just pressing the button that delivers value to an organization, right? Turning up a pod in a data center, pressing the one button to do that orchestration. That's all within the network services arena. I want to get to cross-domain orchestration in a bit, so both of you be thinking about that. But let's have a little sidebar on error checking, and not just I forgot a step, but I got an unexpected result, from a command that was executed on a switch or a router, et cetera. Error checking is supposed to be really, really important as a software development. Seems like we also have room to grow on that from a network automation perspective too. Agree, disagree?
Oh, without a doubt. And this is a great example of where we've all heard the story of automation is going to replace me, right? I'm as a network engineer, automation is going to replace me. I don't want to do automation. It's going to take my job. And this is one of the great quintessential examples of why that's not true, because software can only do what it's told to do, right? At the end of the day, when we're building automation. And the reality is network engineers, in a lot of respects, I truly believe that when you start to go down this path, it actually allows network engineers to go back to being network engineers, because they need to be able to understand and interpret that state. But then when you turn that over to software, imagine the number of tests that you can do in just a very short period of time to validate the network is going. It used to be, I could run, 15, 20 show commands, capture all the output, and then spend the next hour stare and compare and see what's happening. Now I can do that in terms of seconds or even milliseconds to understand, if the network is actually at that step doing and responding the way I'm expecting it to respond.
Yeah.
Well, I laughed when you asked that question, Scott, and the reason is when I write something programmatic, whatever it is, a network automation or something else, I'm lazy at first, man. I am not baking into that all the error handling and all that stuff. It's like, can we just get the basic thing running? And then I get the basic thing running. And do I go back and now add all the error handling routines and input sanitization and so on that I ought to be adding? No, Scott, I tend to not do that.
If you're not part of the solution, Ethan,
I know
you're part of the problem. Now, you teed up my next comment here perfectly. I had the privilege of having a great conversation at NANOG in Atlanta last week with an individual who's built a very mature network automation organization. I don't want to get ahead and use his name here publicly, but part of what they do is look at the error logs that come out of the automations that they run, and they have a process to handle all the lazy Ethans. I mean, all the lazy Scotts who aren't used to robust error handling, and they built in a process to actually take care of that, right? Because I think, not to blame Ethan, right? But there's human behavior, right? And we don't catch everything.
And honestly, Scott, I mean, the reason that me and others tend to leave those things off to the side is most of the time you won't have to deal with errors, making some assumptions, and we're busy humans. We want to get off to. It may not be lazy so much as just pressure to go get other things done, and so it can be hard to bake that needed functionality into our automations.
And I 100% agree with you. And I would cite that as evidence for, okay, you need a culture that emphasizes that. And you need processes that reflect those intentional cultural decisions. So you're absolutely right. Therefore, we've got to do more work to be more robust in handling the unknowns, right?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So I will now, as promised, pull this back up to, like, we focus a lot on orchestrating automations in the network arena. And Peter, you made a comment earlier about orchestration happening. It has to happen in so many other IT disciplines, right? Do you see a future where there are cross-domain orchestration tools that actually get application, compute, storage, and network working together based on that one form I fill out? And those, the form can be provided by other technology suppliers. Like, we live in the real world. So like ServiceNow, like, they try to be the front end for a lot of this stuff. And they're actually making real progress. They're doing some interesting things with network now. What's the future there, Peter? What do you see?
Yeah, I mean, to a degree, we're I won't say we're there, but we are certainly trending in that direction. There's no question about it. I think about even some of the conversations that I get into with, some of our customers that are actually already doing bits and pieces of this today. There is no doubt that, I think that is absolutely where we are headed, to be able to orchestrate across these disciplines. Well, let me say it a different way. When we do get there, it's going to be a very exciting time to be there, because now we're actually starting to work with infrastructure as it was intended to be, and that is, it's kind of more of this big glob of capabilities now that we can tap into and use for building up services, to ultimately support the applications. And so this is a direction that, not only do I think the industry is headed in, I think that we're already starting to see some organizations out front even starting to build some of that capabilities directly into their product. Certainly Attentional being one of them, no doubt. I see this as a direction.
It's definitely an idea that, like, it makes complete sense as an end state, right? And one of the things that hit me first in thinking about the whole idea of total network operations is this is very extensible across IT domains. And why wouldn't I want to have, I'll use the word seamless, highly orchestrated automations that provision the different services from the different pieces of the IT stack to deliver that service and to your point, right, actually deliver value.
Well, Scott, I'll even go. Let me go a step beyond that.
Sure.
So developers are used to the cloud experience. They've been
Right.
bringing up infrastructure in AWS and Azure and so on for a long time now. Okay, so there's a move towards repatriation. Doesn't mean we're abandoning cloud, but it means some workloads are coming back. Developers still want that cloud-like experience. And I think that's what infrastructure people who are used to doing things on premises need to have their heads in that kind of that mindset. I just got to give them a service they can you call with an API or use a form and just bring the thing up and it works. That is an expectation that if you can't deliver that, it's getting to a point where your organization feels backwards. Like, wait, I'm used to cloud and I bring it back on premises and I got to throw a ticket over the wall and you're going to provision it for me by hand, you savage? Come on. You know what I mean?
Arr.
And so
that's right.
Well, that's kind of where it's at. And so when you talk about, you said coordinating app, compute, storage, and network. Yeah, that should be the default position. That should be not this fantastic aspirational thing way off in the distant future. It should be like, how do we build this now? How do we coordinate all of these services? Everything's got an API. I know, as we were talking earlier in the show, a lot of my services are cookie cutter. So why wouldn't I, if at all possible, deliver a service that can be consumed in that cloud-like way, that service offering to my customers internally?
Yeah, and just to add on to that, though, but I think this is, kind of tying this back to, you'd asked the question earlier about the separation between automation and orchestration. This is the one place where it does become important, because I can automate in each one of those domains, but it's when I make that investment in orchestration that really allows me to tie all of that together and deliver that level of experience, because it's well beyond a want at this point. It's an absolute demand now from app dev teams. The things they're asked to do, if I think about, take any given industry, the things that they're asking their application development teams to deliver and the timelines by which they're asking them to deliver it on, they don't have time to wait around anymore for someone to grab a ticket and find time in their schedule over the next 2 weeks to actually be able to deliver. The business demands are far exceeding that, and if the internal teams can't deliver, the only recourse those teams have to do, those developers have to do, is go to the cloud, right? Yeah. And so that's the reality that we live in. And I think that when we can bring that back on premises and we can do it in such a way that it's safe, it's secure, it's scalable, it's performant, that's a big win really across the board. And that summarizes, kind of this whole idea of building products.
Yeah. And I would say to our listeners that are very grounded in traditional NetOps, why not learn both? Why not understand cloud services and cloud networking complementary to your understanding of, on-prem networking? Because the cloud's not going away. Nope. Right. And the automation principles and orchestration principles that you need that are baked in to building and delivering cloud services, why not find a way to apply that to the network side? And just to give a hat tip to Anna Claiborne and her AutoCon 2 presentation, I think she did an incredible job of pointing out why networking is behind, right? Mm-hmm. And creating the culture of memorizing the CLI commands is definitely part of that. And that's how we had to do it for a long time. And now we don't have to do it just that way anymore, as more and more people understand what APIs are, how they can be used, and take these building blocks and really have a systems view of the IT stack. Mm-hmm. Even have a systems view of your entire network, right? Don't think about things in those silos. You've got to think about how it all works together.
Without question. In fact, it's, you think about kind of coming out of this, what I call the kind of the dark ages here, when I talk about my history and my timeline of this thing, but it's almost concerning if you, hindsight being 2020, it's almost concerning to think that we've built some very large network infrastructures with very little to no understanding about how the application infrastructure overlays over the top of it. And how much more we can do now when we really start to understand, what are the true needs of the compute and the storage and the application and whatnot. And now we can really start to, I think, it's going to drive different thought patterns in terms of how we design networks, how we deliver networks. And it really brings us to a place where we become more integrated into the organization and into the stack in a way that is highly beneficial, to the organization at large.
Most networks that I've built have been on the premise of, I think I know what we probably need, and I'm going to over provision like a beast and hope it's enough. As opposed to, I understand that these workloads live here. We have demands at these times, et cetera, et cetera. You never really know, and so you just build the biggest, baddest thing you can with your budget and cable it in a way that you hope it's going to be enough, as opposed to that integrated approach where you actually had an intelligent conversation with other people in your team and built something with intent to support what's going on. It's a very different approach that is where we need to be in IT in a modern day.
It is for sure. And, I would throw out and I'm going to take a little liberty here for just a moment, if you don't mind, but I throw out this idea of, keep in mind that for network engineers who are listening to this and they're thinking to themselves, there's no way in hell, right? No way. Just bear in mind, there was a point in time when even Amazon, wasn't Amazon, right? There was a point in time when they only had one or two services. They started small as well. Google started small as well. All of the hyperscalers started somewhere. And that's kind of always the point of start somewhere. You don't have to have this out of the gate, quote unquote, version 1, right? Have this as a bellwether, a North Star, whatever term you want to give to it. Work towards it, but don't let it overwhelm you to the point of you become, it paralyzes your ability to move forward.
I'll write the check to you later, Peter. I don't think you could have teed this up better for me. One of the distillations I've had over these conversations of the years is being a next gen network engineer. It's not subnets and spanning tree anymore. Like, that's table stakes, right? And now I need to understand what the difference between automations are and what orchestration is. I need to use tools like Git. I need to understand what a pipeline is, and it's not gonna look exactly the same way on a network as it does for a production code base. But there are principles that apply. The software eats the world, right? It really does. Mm-hmm. And the software development tooling and ecosystem, it just continues to gather more steam. Why not find ways to leverage that? Like, as a developing network engineer, I should become more literate in those tools. So again, thank you for the tee up on that. on the separation of applications and the network, the comments you both made, I definitely agree with. However, we had the sense for the longest time that there needs to be some correlation between what's happening with the network and application behavior. And that's where DiffServ comes from. And that's where other marketing ideas for application aware networking that one of my vendor employers may or may not have pushed 10 or 15 years ago, right? There's always been this, we have this hole in our soul that knows that the network should be more accommodating of application behavior. But we're bringing real tools to the table that can let us provision network infrastructure more agilely, and certainly in the cloud, but now on, traditional networks. And why not figure out ways to do that more effectively? I want to pull it back to the delivering value conversation as we kind of wind this down. I love that concept of delivering value as like a good functional definition of orchestration. Again, Peter, you've seen multiple customers go through this. Are there any nuggets that you would give to individuals and organizations listening? Like, I've already started to orchestrate. I've already started to automate stuff. Like, I've got people writing Python scripts. Now, how do I get more mature? How do I get more towards that value creation and production concept?
Yeah, I think, for what I've seen in the many organizations and individuals I've spoken with, I think the big thing that I see is, and I kind of alluded to this a little bit earlier, but I want to reiterate the point because I do think it is super important, is that, we often take automation to mean, let me take everything that I've been doing manually and just shove it into software and let software do it. Some of that is true, but if that is kind of what if looking at as the finish line for automation and orchestration, I think you're missing the point. This is an opportunity, and we don't get these opportunities very often in our careers. This is one of those opportunities where we can truly redefine how we go about designing, building, and operating network infrastructure. The fundamentals don't change, to your point. You still have to subnet. You still have to understand spanning tree. You still have to understand Dijkstra's algorithm. You still have to know what a link state database is. You still need to know all of those things. But now we can apply it in new and innovative ways that really allow us to change how we approach the creation of network services, and using automation and orchestration ultimately allows us to do that. So that would be the kind of the real big takeaway, I would say, as I think about this is don't get so hung up on just automating the way you've always done it. Take the opportunity to say, is there a better way to do this? And when you do that, that's what really opens the doors. Reach out, if I could steal from the political space, right? Reach out across the aisle. Those developers, they're not bad people. They don't hate you. They just don't want to talk to you. But extend the olive branch, have the conversation, right? You'd be surprised what you can learn from them, and conversely, what they'll learn from you.
Yeah, I agree with that, Peter, in that I have spent time doing exactly that. Developer put a ticket in, walk over to his desk and go, hey, so you asked for this. What's up? What are you building? And then it turns into this whole, first it was a sigh and then a look up to me. Why are you here right now? Just do the thing, man. Like, no, I want to understand what we're building. What are we doing? And then when you get that conversation and that dialogue going, and there's an exchange of information back and forth, it could be that what they asked for isn't the best thing for them. You can build something better that accomplishes the goal in a better way, or a more secure way, or a more performant way, or whatever. And then you've built trust then with that person. And once you've built trust with that person, the conversations get easier going forward. And they might come to you in advance. Hey, I'm building the thing, and I could use some advice on what we're going to need from a network perspective. And then you can bake all that into your automation, because you understand what they're building and they understand what you can offer, and you end up with a better product at the end of the day.
That's exactly right.
I couldn't agree with that more. Like, that was a very critical lesson early in my networking career, where I was in IT network for a very large telco, and part of my job was to kind of walk around to the different app dev groups in my campus. And I got the nickname of the mayor of Chesapeake Complex because I took Ethan's advice preemptively 30 years before he offered it, and basically worked with the teams to say, okay, let's understand what you're trying to do. And like, with the knowledge of what's happening to the network infrastructure, I could also do things like, hey, we're upgrading to 100 meg backbone in this building. Yes, I just said 100 meg. You might want to wait, till we get that upgrade done before you start delivering remote video training to the 200 people on your team. That's a real example. So, look, we can't finish this without, putting a little pressure on Peter. He's revealed that he served in operational roles. So some of the fun questions I like to ask, and Peter, I'll give you the option. Is there a major outage that you caused that you'd like to own up to right now? Or did you, back in the day, did you have favorite maintenance window music?
Oh boy.
And I'll give you very broad passage to address either of those as you'd like, or offer your own fun response.
Oh gosh. Only one outage I'll own up to. Let's see if I can come up with just one. So I will share with one. This one's kind of a fun one. This was quite a few years ago. I was if we all remember the days of the God box, pseudo wire L2 over MPLS control planes. So I was working for a startup that was delivering on one of these products, and we were working on a deployment, and I was in the data center, in the production data center. I needed to make a bit of a change to some cabling and pulled the wrong cable. The cable that I happened to pull took down a transatlantic IPv6 connection between Asia and the West Coast.
Awesome.
Luckily, it was not in production. I will at least say that it was not in production, but I did take it down, and it did set off, as you might expect. It lit up the knock pretty good. So that was one of my good ones.
Good for you. And yeah, no, keep going. I don't want to stop you.
No, in terms of gosh, favorite music on a maintenance window. Yeah, I was I've got two different ways that I've always gone about maintenance windows, and a lot of it depended on the type of maintenance we were doing. There was always classical music. Always want to keep the team calm and
nice,
connected and engaged. And then there's hair on fire. Let's turn on the classic rock at volume 11.
Yeah. Now, I think you're the first person to cite classical music, right?
Yep.
And I'm like, there's something magic about Yo-Yo Ma and cello that just cuts through stress for me. And that's my good office music. Thankfully, I don't have to cover maintenance windows anymore. But that or a little Vince Guaraldi, right?
There you go. Very fine choices.
Well, look, thank you so much for coming on. Peter, anything we didn't cover that you wanna touch on before we break?
No, I think we hit a lot of the big stuff. I think that it's an exciting time in the industry. I think it's exciting to see the number of products and projects that we're starting to spring up that are starting to incorporate some of this. You think about what's going on with network automation forum, and finally having a group that's coming together and bringing a lot of this brain trust together in a way that we can start to learn from each other. We just talked about reaching across the aisle. This is another good example of where we can all come together and really start to learn from one another. But I think you look at what's going on in the product space and in the community space, and certainly what's going on at Attention. The things that we're starting to build, because we're really embracing this product mindset and really focused on delivering a stack that really empowers the organization at the automation layer, at the orchestration layer, and now at the product layer. So these are all just exciting things. It's fun for me. I think if you're not having fun in networking right now, I really got to wonder what you're doing. I feel like this has been a long time coming. We've kind of coming out of the dark ages, and it's a lot of fun, I think, right now, especially on the operations side, but overall in networking, it's a lot of fun right now.
I agree. And conversations like this and talking across the aisle at places like Network Automation Forum, that I can't tell you how it's more than fun. It's gratifying. And it's incredible to see the conversations. And I think both of you, Ethan and Peter and many others, you're key. You lead by example, and you're making this happen. So thanks to you both for your contributions on that front. Peter, do you want to point folks to you? Where can they find you? Where can they read more about what you're doing?
Yeah, absolutely. People are always welcome to connect with me at LinkedIn. You'll find me, Peter Spergati. You'll find me on X or Twitter at Private IP. You also find me on Mastodon at Private IP at foston.org. So hit me on any of those. Also, you can also find all the work that we're doing at itential.com. Come check it out. Learn more about the product mindset. If this is something that is exciting to you, go take a look. I always love to hear your thoughts, the good and the bad. I don't like just hearing the good stuff. I want to hear the criticisms, the critiques, because that's what drives me and that's what makes us all better. So, love to hear from folks.
Well, thank you both very much for the conversation today. And thank you to all our listeners for tuning into Total Network Operations. As you know, TNOps is a growing project. We'd love your feedback, just like Peter called out, the good and the bad, topics you'd like us to cover, people you'd like to hear from. If you know someone or you are someone with important things to say about NetOps, please let us know. These episodes provide a channel for promoting best practices and big ideas from Peter, Itential, and many others. Spread the word, drop me a DM on LinkedIn, or send a follow-up to packetpushers.net/follow-up. Thanks again, and see you next time on Total Network Operations.